Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Penny Bishop, Dean of BU Wheelock College of Education and Human Development, and it's a delight to welcome you here. Welcome to our second webinar in our 2024-2025 Conversations with the Dean series. As some of you may know, the focus of this webinar series is on recent events and important or hot topics within education. And it's very deeply rooted in our ongoing efforts. Our BU Wheelock Guide Star points the direction to us in terms of what we focus on as a college and as a community of learners. And it says essentially that we are dedicated to transforming the systems that impact learning and human development for a thriving, sustainable, and just future in Boston and beyond. Our webinars are held each month when I get the pleasure of speaking with top scholars and leaders here at BU Wheelock and in our surrounding community. And today I'm really excited to delve into the topic of AI in education and to explore some of the issues that educators face when it comes to AI in the classroom and in schools. So we titled this month's webinar, How AI Will Change Education, which is much the way it's positioned in the broader media. But I also think we'll be talking about how AI already is changing education and also how education shapes AI, as I've learned in previous conversations with these folks. So I'm also really interested in learning more about how our panelists came to work together in the first place and the impact of their collaboration and the future that they see. So thanks for joining me and welcome Naomi and Michael. Naomi Caselli is an associate professor of deaf education, director of the Deaf Center, and the director of the AI and Education Initiative at Boston University. The AI and Education Initiative facilitates research at the intersection of AI and learning for all people of all ages and backgrounds, and all the topics and contexts where learning happens. The initiative transcends disciplinary boundaries, drawing on perspectives on learning spanning computing, education, design, social sciences, medicine, business, and beyond. The AI and Education Initiative uses AI to inform human learning and teaching, takes inspiration from human learning and teaching to advance AI, and builds use-inspired AI technologies learners can use to transform themselves and the world. So welcome, Naomi. I'm also delighted to introduce Mike. With two decades in public education, Mike Marani has experience across all three levels, elementary, middle, and high school, as a teacher and principal. Now, as a director of curriculum at Quincy Public Schools, he leads multiple initiatives, and most notably creating and chairing the district-wide AI planning team to help shape future educational strategies throughout the district. Mike and Naomi, welcome. I'm excited for this conversation since it's a really hot topic in education, really, and everywhere right now, and it's become a part of daily life. Still, it can be quite a polarizing subject among educators, I know, and I'm really excited to just jump right in. I'd love to encourage our audience throughout the discussion to share questions you may have in the Q&A box. I'm sure there'll be plenty, and we'll do our best to thread them into our conversation. So I'm going to start us off right off the bat here, Naomi. I would love for you to frame our conversation a bit. What is AI anyway, and how should we think about it and the different facets of work underway?
Oh, that's a great question. So, artificial intelligence is the ways where computers can mimic the things that humans do. That can be pretty rudimentary, but it could also be fairly complicated. I think the thing that comes to mind uh, uh, now in the public eye are things like generative AI, and ChatGPT, image generation, and text and language and things like that. But really, it's a pretty broad area. Um, and so what do we mean by AI and education? Well, I think the things that have made the headlines have been, oh, how do we sort of uh, maintain the status quo in education? What do we do about plagiarism? Is this the end of the essay? Should we be banning ChatGPT? Things like that. There's also been this sort of rush of um, uh, ed tech, kind of what kinds of technologies should there be for teachers, for kids? There's all these sorts of things. But I think really it's so much more than this, right? At its core, both AI and education, they're about learning, right? Artificial intelligence is machine learning, and education is about people learning. And so I think when we think about this intersection, we ought to be thinking about, well, who's doing that learning? Is it kids? Is it adults? Like, I think we are all learning about AI itself, about the world, could be using AI in that process. Machines are learning too, right? We are teaching machines to adapt to us. So there's that component of it as well. Um, where is that learning happening? Is that learning happening in schools? Is it happening in universities? Is it happening in the workplace, online, in our day-to-day lives? What is it that we're learning? We're learning all the topics. We're learning about AI, about computer science, but we're learning about everything, about medicine, about business, about science, about all the different things that we're learning. I think we should be thinking about who's doing the teaching, right? Who's are the computers doing the teaching? Are people doing the teaching? Are teachers doing the teaching? And then what are the systems around all of that? How are the schools and the districts and the states and the governments kind of working together to make policies, to make systems that support all the people doing it? So this is enormous, right? It's really, really, really big. Um, and I think it's a really big opportunity too, right? Like
Yeah.
we, I think ChatGPT came on the scene and sort of has disrupted what we know and think about education in a way that's a really, like, disruption is painful, and there's some real concerns, I think, that we should be having uh, about how AI and education work together. But with a disruption, it's a real opportunity, right? Like, if what we're trying to do is to transform systems of education so that people can thrive, you know, a disruption is a cool opportunity to to take a pause and to think about, what are our goals here in education? What are we trying to accomplish here? And use it as a moment to really be deliberate and to try and be forward thinking and crafting that future, a future that includes AI in it, but really, what is the future that we're trying to imagine for ourselves, and how can we best get there?
Naomi, thank you. I love how you're sort of positioning it as a disruption, and how sometimes, even though disruption can be painful or challenging, it can also be a disruption for good. And I think we saw that despite the really many tragic outcomes related to COVID-19 and pandemic, there were also some things that, as a disruptor, it helped us to do either more effectively, more efficiently. Definitely some takeaways there. So it's interesting to think about disruptors in education and this in that space. I'm a very beginner user with my AI and ChatGPT, and so I've used it to help me construct some, opening remarks for this or that. And even in that sort of very introductory level usage, I can see, gosh, there are opportunities here for consumption or composition. I can create with it, or I can consume with it. I could plagiarize with it. It raises those kinds of questions, but it also raises very different questions around learning more vocabulary and thinking about crafting careful queries and things of that nature. It opens up all kinds of things for critical media literacy. Just the list goes on. And then the idea of ethics as it relates to it. So I'm super jazzed about all of this, and just appreciate the work that the two of you are doing. Mike, in thinking about what Naomi just shared, what are you seeing in classrooms with teachers and students, and how is it reshaping teaching and learning, if at all?
Yeah, well, I think that the key of what Naomi said is that this is a very broad topic, and there is so much that this technology has the ability to touch upon and to impact. And so I would say, as far as how it's kind of impacting educators and students, is we're all in the process of figuring out, okay, what does this technology do? How is it currently impacting us? And by us, I mean, how is it helping teachers do their job, lesson plan, things of that nature, but also how is it making their jobs harder at this moment? And a lot of that comes into how students are using it. And so, you know, as I said, it's very broad because I would really break it up in terms of, you know, as a district, we're focused right now on what are the short-term needs right now. In other words, there are students that are using it when they go home. We know this. We certainly don't want to stand in the way of innovation and a tool that students can use. Yet we also want to understand it ourselves so we can put the guardrails, you know, along the age levels of students in an appropriate manner. So I would say right now, the biggest impact beyond students using it and us kind of questioning when they are, when they aren't, is more so trying to get teachers access to as much professional development as possible. We're very much in the learning stage of what the potential impact might be. Nobody really knows. It kind of feels like everybody's waiting for this big shakeup, and it, you know, we don't know if it's going to happen all at once or if it's just going to happen in drips. As so far that's been the case. It's been kind of happening slowly over time, with the exception of, you know, ChatGPT coming out was a huge turning point. I mean, that was pivotal. But it was, you know, since that point, everybody's been in this exploratory stage. I also think that there's just a little bit of fear is not the right word, but hesitation, because it's such a new technology that I think that there's a lot of teachers out there that want to use it, but don't know if they should, don't know if they're allowed to, can they have students use it? So that goes back to what Naomi had mentioned about policy, right? Where everything is kind of in the newborn stage. And so there isn't that policy yet that people can refer to and rely on. You know, there's a lot of people out there creating policy, but it seems as though as quickly as somebody creates a policy, it becomes outdated because the technology evolves so quickly, which is, you know, part of why we have taken our approach the way we have it at QPS, which, you know, we can speak about later. But yeah, it's broad. And then I just think as you zoom out and you look at long term, I think we should be asking ourselves the question, not how is it impacting, but how should it be impacting us? And that's, you know, we should be making moves alongside the short term, but we should be making moves right now to say, how do we want to nudge this in the right direction so that this can be the asset it has potential to be? Knowing that we don't know how to answer that question just yet.
Mike, thank you. I appreciate your thinking around guardrails. That's a helpful metaphor for me to think about. So I'm curious how the two of you came to work together in the first place. What's the history of the collaboration, and what issues were you hoping to solve? Either one of you.
Naomi, I'll start because I think you know, for me, it was our connection that really brought forth the not urgency, but just the importance of this subject. So we have a professional day of learning each year in this district. And last year, when we offered 3 breakout sessions offered by Naomi had, you know, facilitated each of those 3 sessions. Now this is across, I think total we offered maybe 90 different PDs, and Naomi was offering one of them for 3 sessions. All 3 sessions were the first to fill up within the first 30 minutes of registration. This was last year. So to me, that was a telltale sign of, okay, there's definitely an appetite for learning more about this. You know, for us to fill up so quickly, told us, okay, teachers want to learn more about this. They want to understand this. And that was really what connected Naomi and me together, as far as, you know, I think she was walking out of the PD that day and I chased her down saying, we have to continue to work together because clearly there's a demand. And quite frankly, there aren't too many people that understand education and AI. And so that to me is a unique combination in terms of, you know, professional development, getting the right experts in front of your educators. So that was really what kicked it off. And then since then, you know, we've worked together on, you know, several other initiatives throughout them, but that was really what kind of kicked it off between QPS and BU with Naomi.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I'm looking in the chat and seeing a couple of these specific comments, and makes me kind of think of what we've been doing in these professional development sessions, where I think and you opened with this, Dean Bishop, about this is polarizing, right? Like there are lots of good reasons to be really excited about the opportunities that are here, and there are lots of good reasons to be horrified, sheer panic about the possible consequences that are here. I think some of them are coming up in the chat. Yeah, like these technologies, particularly things like ChatGPT, they're trained on data that comes from the internet, and the internet, not the prettiest place in the world, right? And we have all kinds of human biases and human ways of being ugly to one another that get kind of baked into these models. And so as we think about how we use them and how kids are using them and how they're incorporated into schools, I think we need to have some real caution, and we need to have that as educators. We need to have real facility in understanding what these patterns are and how they work and how they don't work, and make sure that we're not just letting AI save the day here. I think the concerns about plagiarism are similar. Like, we cannot detect with any certainty whether people are using these tools or not, and so when we punish kids for using tools that we can't, and I don't know the details of that Hingham case that's in the chat, but I think you run into some real tricky territory trying to think about the kinds of consequences that we employ. So I think on that side there's sheer panic, and in these PD sessions, my goal has been to make the people who are enthusiastic a little less enthusiastic, and the people who have sheer panic maybe a little less sheer panic, or at least a little mixed, and both, because I feel really deeply both the panic and the enthusiasm at the same time, and I think we probably all need a little bit of both.
Maybe let's take it down a notch to sort of the on the ground lived experience right now of teachers and students. Could either of you share some specific AI tools that students are using in education right now?
You want to talk about?
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, not necessarily in the classroom, but students are 100% using ChatGPT at home, I know the question around, is this something students are using in an appropriate or inappropriate manner? I think that's an important question, but I think like any tool, it depends on the user, right? And I think there's lots of tools out there. Quite frankly, where we're at as a district is tools for teachers and understanding artificial intelligence more before we do any sort of formal integration of specific AI technology in the classroom. That being said, the teachers are not naive. We know that students, if they have a writing assignment when they go home, we know that there's a good chance they're using ChatGPT or other generative AI tools out there, but ChatGPT would be the most common at this point, I assume. But I think that the reality is, our job as educators is figuring out how to best support students to use it appropriately and to use it effectively. And so that's what we're exploring, to make sure that they're not just throwing in a quick prompt, generating something, and then hitting send and submitting that as work. The term that I've been hearing a lot that I really like is using ChatGPT as a thought assistant, right? So helping adults and students and everybody that's using it interact with it as a way to help prompt your own thinking and turning it into something. But that requires skill, and that requires a certain approach. And I think that as we look at tools students are using, I think there's probably a bunch out there as far as, different ways they can make sure their essays don't come off as plagiarized. There's all sorts of new technology out there. What I can say is there's a fire hose of technology platforms out there. And so to pick just one or two, I think that's a little too difficult at this point. But quite frankly, I think it's a great tool if we can help students use that tool effectively and appropriately. And, we'll see how that goes. we're working on it.
Mhm. So if we were to think about AI from a enhancement standpoint, because I love this idea of a thought assistant, that's really helpful to me. How can AI enhance the learning experience if we think about it from that sort of asset orientation? Can we get more specific?
Sure. I mean, sure. I think we're at the very sort of beginning stages about, we're all beginning users of these technologies in some way. And so, uh, so, so that I don't know that there's an expert in exactly all of these sorts of things. I think there are some really interesting tools. We talked a lot about ChatGPT, but there's some really interesting translation software that I think could be really interesting. You could thinking about how to make some of your materials accessible to kids who primarily use another language, or families, things like that. We have some cool research going on in the initiative right now, thinking about how those machine translation tools may work or may not work with kids who are on IEPs, like that have really technical terms that mean really specific things that get lost in translation. So how does that work, and how does that make families better able to advocate for their kids, or not? As are there unanticipated consequences there? So I think there's some interesting opportunities around translation. I think one of the ways that I use these tools a lot is sort of as a writing partner. Like, give me some ideas about stuff to say next. Like, I don't want you to write anything for me, but give me some ideas about examples that might be cool. And so I think it can inspire creativity in that way, where like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. Now I have like a always available thought partner that I that I might have nagged a friend for before, but you can't nag your friend quite as often as I nag ChatGPT. So I think in terms of creativity, it can be really helpful. Um, yeah, I don't know. Curious what you've encountered.
Mike?
I'm very excited at the potential of differentiated instruction being easier and easier for educators. The demand is certainly there. There's such a diverse set of needs across students at all levels. And I think anything we can do to equip those teachers to individualize their instruction in a more targeted, a more strategic way, I think is just going to benefit our students so much. And so to me, I think that, and I think, to that end, right, you could also throw in translation in there as well. So, our district has a significant EL population in terms of the percentage of our district, and we're certainly not unique in that way across the state. And so I think I view it as a potential access point, a new access point for many learners. And so when we talk about this tool enhancing learning, to me, where I'm optimistic and where I'm excited is it's going to be easier for educators to understand an individual student's needs. And more importantly, because a lot of them understand the needs right now, it's more importantly, like, what can they do about it? How can they help and answer those needs? And I'm hopeful that AI will help be a bridge to that place where that becomes second nature, because it's very hard to do now, and it's very consuming for educators.
I mean, here a concrete example. Can I a concrete example of how you might do that, right? Like, if I know that a student has a particular interest, or if I know that there's another class, like maybe I'm teaching, a science class, but I know that a student is doing something different in an English class, I could think about developing, here's my lesson plan that I was going to do for today. I'm going to give you some slides or some background information about that student's interests, about what they're doing in other places. Can you tweak this lesson plan for me so that it's a little bit more tailored to their particular interests? Or you could make a leveled text where I have a text here and I'd like to I'd like to make multiple versions so that we're all talking about the same thing. Maybe it's tied to a current event or tied to something that news article that happened today, and I want to have it be in multiple at multiple levels of complexity. I want it to also be available in Spanish. You could, there are tools to make that possible and to make that possible quickly. So I think the kinds of customizing that you can do, just some concrete examples, I think, of that kind of differentiated instruction that could be possible
Those
with
are,
caveats.
yeah, no, those are really helpful examples of how to differentiate or personalize. Thank you. Connected to that, there are a few comments from the audience that seem to focus on critical thinking. And one question I think that encompasses several is this idea that AI is in its infancy still in education. And so what is being done to educate students to think critically so they can use the AI tool as a learning assistant? Can either of you speak to that?
I'm happy to at least say kind of what I've encountered so far, but I'll acknowledge that more work needs to be done as far as emphasizing new strategies that promote critical thinking among our students, for sure. That being said, I mentioned earlier that a big part of our current focus is professional development, right? Getting educators as exposed as possible to the different ways it can be used both by students and teachers. But it's also about professional development that gives access and exposure to strategies for exactly that. How can they encourage and promote critical thinking, knowing that students are likely using this tool? So very quick examples of this is, now if there's a student who's submitting an essay, it might be commonplace for a teacher to just, after they read it, ask a couple, like 2 or 3 questions in a conversation type structure and having a student speak to what they wrote, right? And saying, okay, why do you feel this way? Right? So just by having that student have to speak to what they wrote later, it's going to cause them, one, to make sure they know what they wrote and they stand for it, but then 2, be able to support what they're saying with evidence. And so that's a very quick strategy that you might not have had to have done in the past, where you could kind of take it, though I will say plagiarism is always a concern. It's not new with AI, right? It's always something that we want to, steer kids away from. But at the end of the day, I think creating opportunities for students to verbalize their reasoning, their logic, and their evidence with one another, in small groups with their teachers out loud. And I think by doing that, creating more opportunities in that way, you're prompting students to think critically because they're going to have to speak to whatever the work is that they're producing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love this question about critical thinking. I think to me, over and over, the conversation keeps coming back to what are we doing and why? And I think there are a whole new set of thinking skills that we need to focus on more that we never did before, and probably some things that we used to do that we don't need to do so much anymore. And it's a chance for us to be really thoughtful about that. So some concrete examples of what I mean there, I think, like, there's this human heuristic where, like, if I'm reading a student's work and it's formatted well, maybe it's like got the right citation format and it's got the heading and it's kind of got the paragraphs and the spelling looks good, right? I might say, yeah, that looks like pretty good writing, because my alarm bells don't go off. Now ChatGPT gives you something that looks beautiful and it's perfectly formatted. There's no spelling errors and it makes absolutely no sense. All of the citations are made up, right? So there's this whole new skill that we need to be identifying what's incorrect information, what that these tools are just making up, what's totally fabricated, what is misinformation or disinformation, these tools are often being used in ways that are intentionally manipulative and harmful. Deep fakes and things like that. We've been talking a lot about ChatGPT, but there's other ways that these tools are being used to pass the sort of our sniff test and get information into people's consciousnesses. So I think there's a whole new set of skills that we need to be, not new, but a different kind of set of skills that we might not have emphasized before that we could be. And other skills, I think about it in my own teaching, like, am I going to work on the mechanics of APA formatting when you don't need to do that? Maybe it's not worth my time to teach my graduate students those mechanics as much as I used to. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to go back and say, what are we doing here? Why? How can we be making sure that people are being creative and using critical thinking and doing all these important skills in a world where these tools exist?
Well, and it invites us to let go of something that we're not very good at doing in the field of education. We like to add, but rarely do we subtract, right? So I can appreciate that. So given all of that, then what is the state of the system right now and the policies? So as we think about the infrastructure, the guidelines, the standards, what's the state of the system in supporting AI in education? Mike, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I'm pleased to share that, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education does have a task force together where they are looking at these issues. And, I don't know what the outcome of that will be, but I believe they started about a month ago, maybe a little bit before that. So I'm pleased in that, our state educational department understands the importance of this and sees that it's impacting learning and back to Naomi's point, it's prompting all of us as educators to ask ourselves, why is this still important to teach, knowing that there's this tool that has changed things? And the answer might still be yes, it's still very important, or maybe not so much, or somewhere in the middle. But from a system standpoint, one thing that we at the district level and even just at the classroom level, one challenge we have is, we have frameworks, and it is our responsibility to educate students based on those frameworks. And so it puts teachers in a very tough position, because they're asking themselves why, they're pondering those, they're doing what an educator should do. They're reflecting on the core value of what they're teaching, but they also know they do have a list of standards that they have to teach. So I'm optimistic, because it does look like the department is going to be, making some changes upon this, task force kind of coming together and assessing what the needs are and hopefully helping us along the way. At the district level, what we've done is we've put together a team of teachers, of administrators, essentially to focus on two things. One, get as much professional development as possible. And two, let's come up with initially a policy language that we could propose to district leadership and school committee. But we actually, as we went through that process, we shifted and we kind of used the terminology guidelines, because we felt like every time we would have a conversation, our next meeting, some of what we said was like, okay, that's not relevant anymore. And so it has to, there's a need for systemic agility that's, I think, more pressing than we've experienced before. And so that's what we're doing as a district, is making sure that we have guidelines that are current, but can be adapted quickly if need be. And I would say that's what I think most, if not all, districts are somewhere along the lines working on. We're certainly working on that.
Yeah. I mean, this stuff is moving so fast. And things are outdated yesterday, and there's so much happening that keeping up with it is not possible. And there are major areas where we need work. I think policies are a big piece of it. We need the research evidence to ground those policies, to guide teachers, to help us understand what the impacts are. I looked I can't remember when I did this, maybe a year ago. I just did a quick look of AERA, which is kind of the big education research conference, as you know, on uh, here in the US, and the number of presentations that were about AI, even as recently as last year, like minuscule proportion of the research that's happened. Like you could count on one hand the kinds of the kinds of topics. That's not to say the research isn't happening. It's just happening in really different spheres. And I think we need more thinking about what these impacts are. Um, Certainly policy, there's some federal guidelines that are or sort of some guidance that we can probably drop in the chat that are helpful to sort of as a framework for how to think about this. I think flexibility is exactly the key here, that we kind of across the board need a whole lot of flexibility to see how people use these tools and what some of the impacts are, which is scary because they do have some really harmful consequences, and they're going to have some harmful consequences as we learn what they are and how they're getting used.
And I appreciate your mentioning the AERA as sort of the US context, and I'm sure there's a lot we could probably learn internationally or more globally as well in terms of where this work is happening. Naomi, are you aware of any particular places where they're really grappling with this or doing any work? Or Mike, are either of you?
No, I mean, I think, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, quite honestly, not too much. I think it's in the chat, but there are federal guidelines out there. And it's something that I've read multiple times. Converting that to action at the local level is still very difficult. And so I think it's obviously that you have to start somewhere, right? And so the fact that it exists is a step in the right direction. And now we're starting to see that impact different states across the nation. And so eventually it will get to us. I think me as an educator working for a school district, the luxury of waiting just isn't there. We have students that were at school today. And so we've got to take care of those kids today, kind of regardless of the pace of how things work beyond. So I think, again, I think it's all great. And I think it's valuable for any stakeholder to have an awareness and to be reviewing the guidelines that do exist. And I think the prompting question as you're reviewing those should be, how does this lead to action today versus is this a broader thing that is good to know, but it doesn't necessarily change what we're doing. And I think that's a perspective we need to have as we review these guidelines that do exist currently.
Yeah, I love those questions. Those are really helpful and pointed. I'll note that one of our guests, Jay, was mentioning that in the Philippine classroom context, AI has been widely used since the pandemic, and that might be a place for us to look for continued learning. So thank you, Jay, for your comments in that space. I think, let's see, I've got time probably for one more question, and I'd love to hear, Naomi, maybe you could start us off talking a little bit about how the collaboration with Quincy has shaped the AI and Ed initiative here at BU and the work happening here at BU Wheelock.
Yeah, I mean, I have really appreciated the opportunity. So I've, the opportunity to go back and talk with teachers multiple times and kind of see what that and kind of have a learning progression alongside the educators there has been really interesting. I mean, from the first time that I came, where it was like, oh my God, what is this thing, and how, like, what is this thing? Should it be allowed? At the time, there was like New York City had banned ChatGPT, and right, so it was this very early days of what is this stuff, to more and more kind of nuanced conversations as we've started to think about kind of really more grappling with, okay, well, how do we use this? How do we get everybody on the same page to think about how we use it? It's absolutely shaped my thinking around what we're doing with the initiative. Just the I think one of the most revealing things to me has been the complete split in the kinds of things that the Quincy teachers are bringing up in these PDs and the kinds of things that are happening at the big AI and education conferences and what's happening, from the computer science side of things, where more, I think, of this education research is happening, where the technologists are like, well, what are the pain points that teachers are experiencing, and how can we make tweak these so that we can make lesson plans better, and what are the use cases that teachers that kids really want, or developing models, not even the branded tools that you're thinking about, but sort of that we've been talking about today, but that sort of how do we take student data and identify them as whatever, all these different ways that the technologists side are thinking about things. And then you go into to Quincy, and I'm talking to the teachers, and the teachers are like, what about trust in my classroom? I don't trust my students anymore because they're submitting work to me that I don't know if they wrote or not. And it's completely undermined my ability to have a relationship and an authentic relationship with my students. Worlds, just worlds apart, the kinds of things that that are the kinds of topics that are happening, and also the kind of timbre of the conversation, where on one side it's like wild enthusiasm, and on the other side it's much more skepticism, and that disconnect doesn't seem unfamiliar in other aspects of my work in education, sort of where there are, who is driving the work, who is doing the work, who is the work for and by, and who is how are we experiencing one another in this sphere. There are all kinds of questions that doing the work in Quincy has really raised for me.
Really underscores the importance of doing this work in partnership. Mike, any final thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Naomi uses the word trust, and I agree. I think it's causing all of us to trust what's in front of us, the content in front of us, and to know, is this used by AI? To what degree? And then it causes confusion, because it's like, well, it sounds like it might be AI, but at the same time, there are some decent points that were connected to what we said. So I think it creates kind of this potential obstacle of doubt that educators now have, that maybe they didn't realize they had before, or it just wasn't as significant. And so I think at the end of the day, one kind of, to shift it in the optimistic way, is to say, I think that it's also created a scenario where it's prompting more direct conversation around what these students are producing. And I think it's actually helping the rapport and the connection between teachers and students, because it demands verbal dialogue and more conversation. So again, pros and cons to both of these sides, but I think the key thing here is that, yeah, you have kind of the technologists that have one perspective, and the educators are just saying, right, but I need to support my students today. How do I help them? How do I make sure they're getting the skills they need so that they can produce when they graduate from here and move on?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate both of your time today. It's been really, we could be spending a lot more time together, I know, talking about these things. And I want to give a big shout out to the audience for your active engagement. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions. Lots of great questions and comments that we very much appreciate. And feel free to reach out to us here at BU Wheelock, or I'm sure Mike would be happy to talk with you too at Quincy to keep the conversation going. I've learned a lot, and I'm excited about what you've accomplished, and also optimistic, as you both have used that word, about what the future holds. So I appreciate this example of collaboration. I want to share a couple of things to encourage you all to keep coming back. Our next webinar on November 21st is when we'll explore our informal or out of the classroom learning it'll be made available. Let's see, what am I trying to say here? Our next webinar, which actually I think is not going to be our next, I think we're going to have a surprise webinar in between those, but we do have a webinar on November 21st, where we'll explore our informal or out of the classroom learning made available through today's digital technologies, where I'll be joined by BU Wheelock's Nermeen Dashush and digital producer Nika Bowden. So don't miss out on that chance to meet these two brilliant and super creative professionals. And then we offer other events as well, and some of them are in person. So if you use the QR code and take a look, you'll see examples of those, including tonight at 5:30. We're showing a special screening of the documentary Healing Nation, followed by a panel discussion with the filmmaker and members of the Massachusetts tribal communities. So just wanted to make sure you all knew what's going on here at BU Wheelock and in our broader community, and thank you all for coming. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.